A bizarre discovery in Egypt along the banks of the Nile has experts stumped.
They find 10 bodies in total, laid side by side. But why were they buried here?
A seemingly natural phenomenon has gone unexplained for decades.
These circles are a hotly debated mystery among botanists, biologists, and ecologists alike.
So what is creating them?
New discoveries unearthed in the Nile River Delta could solve the mystery of an ancient lost city.
The more they dig, the more the sands reveal. And this is no casual build.
Astonishing discoveries unearthed from the depths of the desert. Ancient lost cities. Forgotten treasures. Mysterious structures. Extraordinary curiosities, once lost to the sands of time, are finally exposed. As new technology uncovers remarkable tales hidden beneath the deserts of the world, the secrets in the sand will finally be revealed. Around 700 kilometers south of Cairo, across the Nile River from the town of Aswan, is the ancient Egyptian site of Kubath el-Hawa.
It's situated very close to the western edge of the Nile and looks like a huge sand dune rising up from the riverbank.
Perched on top of the hill is a small domed shrine that gives the site its name, Kubath el-Hawa, which means Dome of the Wind.
The dome dates back to 2500 BCE. While conducting field work nearby, a team of archaeologists discover something strange under a garbage dump, dated to the Byzantine era.
They find the remains of ancient crocodiles. It's a bizarre sight.
And it's not just a couple of crocodiles. They find 10 in total, laid side by side. 5 are just heads, but one is a nearly complete specimen measuring about 2 meters long. The others range from 1.8 to 3.5 meters and are in various states of preservation.
After analyzing the shape of the skulls and the arrangement of the bony plates, called scutes, the team determines that there are not one, but 2 different species of crocodile present.
They found West African and Nile crocodiles, both of which were native to the area. They're very similar in appearance, but West African crocodiles tend to be smaller and less aggressive than their Nile counterparts, which are estimated to be responsible for up to 200 deaths each year.
On average, Nile crocodiles are between 4 and 4.5 meters long, weigh around 400 kilograms, and have a lifespan of 50 to 60 years in the wild. While West African crocodiles are typically between 1.5 and 2.5 meters long and have a slightly shorter lifespan.
Although West Africa crocodiles can still be found throughout Central and West Africa, they have vanished from the Nile region. This is probably because of climate change or human activity.
The crocodiles are remarkably well preserved due to the extreme heat and arid conditions of the desert, which aids in preventing rot and tissue damage over long periods. Examination of the crocodile remains reveals that some of them have bone fractures and lesions, evidence of traumatic injury.
One of the crocodiles has a healed fracture on its dorsal ribs and 2 healed fractures on its ventral ribs. Another has a healed fracture on its fibula and lesions on its left metatarsal and right metacarpal. But these injuries wouldn't have been severe enough to kill them. They were likely the result of territorial fights.
None of the bodies show signs that they suffered a violent death at the hands of humans or other animals. So what happened to these crocodiles?
Further investigation finds small fragments of linen with the bodies, mostly eaten away by insects.
Egyptians were known to wrap human bodies in linen as part of the burial process. Its presence suggests that someone buried these crocodiles here for a reason.
Ancient crocodile remains have been found in other parts of Egypt, most famously at Kom Ombo, about 50 kilometers north of Kubath al-Hawa. It contains a temple dedicated to the god Sobek, who manifested as a crocodile.
Thousands of crocodiles have been excavated around Komombo, and many were found to be wrapped in linen as part of the mummification process. So it's logical to conclude that the bodies found at Kubath al-Hawa aren't just regular crocodiles, they're crocodile mummies.
Animal mummification practices were widespread throughout ancient Egypt. Cats, baboons, cows, hawks, and even frogs have all been discovered within tombs.
They actually had breeding programs that supplied a stream of different animals, specifically to be killed and mummified. It's been estimated that some 70 million animal mummies were produced over 1,200 years, from around 800 BCE to 400 CE.
And when animal supply was low, some shrewd entrepreneurs produced and sold fake mummies. The linen wrappings were stuffed with things like eggshells, sticks, and feathers.
Along with the linen, the team also discovers small pieces of rope around the remains.
The rope means that the crocodiles could have been tied up before death, indicating that they could have been captive animals. In terms of how they were mummified, they could have been simply buried in the sand in order to desiccate or mummify naturally.
Further testing is needed to determine their exact age. But the bodies have no traces of resin, which was used extensively in mummification starting around 300 BCE during the Ptolemaic period.
When they investigate further, the team notices that the croc mummies are surrounded by simple rock structures. That it's actually a rudimentary tomb that's part of a much bigger complex. But why were they buried here?
Below the domed shrine and built into the hill is one of the most densely packed cemeteries of ancient Egypt, with hundreds of tombs dating back as far as 2500 BCE.
It's called the Tombs of the Nobles, and it's a truly remarkable place, with 4 stories of burial sites gouged into the sandstone.
Many of the tombs are connected, most likely by family. And although they aren't as well preserved as other Egyptian burial sites, there are hieroglyphic texts and painted scenes that tell stories about the lives of their occupants.
Most of the crypts follow the same basic floor plan: an entrance hall, a room with pillars, and a passage that leads to a burial chamber.
The ones in the top tiers tend to be a bit more humble, while the lower ones can be quite lavish. The crocodiles were found lower down, so maybe that means they were mummified and buried as status symbols for their owners in the afterlife.
For ancient Egyptians, possessing exotic animals showed wealth and influence. At the ancient site of Hierakonpolis, just over 100 kilometers to the north, excavations have unearthed the remains of elephants, leopards, baboons, and even hippos near the tombs of prominent citizens.
The Egyptians were known to keep dogs, cats, and other animals. And in a few rare cases, if a pet died before its owner, it was mummified and placed in a tomb to wait for its master to keep him or her company in the afterlife. But there is no evidence that the Egyptians kept crocodiles as pets. They were feared as very dangerous creatures.
One Egyptian ruler, Prince Thutmose, went to great lengths to ensure his beloved cat was afforded the kind of lavish lifestyle in the afterlife as it was accustomed to while living.
The cat is buried in its own limestone sarcophagus, ornately decorated with various scenes and hieroglyphics. At the back, a cat is shown at a table piled high with offerings to the gods, and a lotus flower, the symbol of resurrection.
But the crocodile mummies are just buried in the ground, so it doesn't appear that they were treated like the pampered pets of the upper echelon of Egyptian society. What is going on here?
A tomb of crocodile mummies discovered beneath the domed shrine at Kubath al-Hawa leaves experts searching for answers. Mummified animals were often dedicated to the gods with whom they were associated, and could have acted as intermediaries to carry a dedicator's prayer to that god.
We think that such animals were raised in temples and sold to worshippers for this purpose, to serve as votive offerings. So mummified crocodiles might have carried prayers to Sobek, the crocodile god.
The ancient Egyptians were known to worship Sobek, a deity frequently depicted as a human with the head of a crocodile, who has a temple in his name at Kom Ombo.
Sobek was a very important god. The Egyptians were afraid of crocodiles, so they offered him various things in an attempt to please him.
People who lived along the river relied on its flooding to fertilize their crops. They believed their offerings were necessary to satisfy the god Sobek, so that he would create an adequate flood.
To give an idea of how seriously the Egyptians took these offerings, there were crocodile priests whose sole purpose was to mummify crocodiles and offer them to the gods. They were treated and prepared virtually the same way as human mummies.
One mummy excavated at Komombo was found to have the leg of a cow in its stomach. This suggests that it was fed by humans, because in the wild, crocodiles mainly eat fish, small mammals, and small reptiles.
This crocodile was also found to have over 25 mummified hatchlings on its back. It's likely this was meant to symbolize crocodile mothers in the wild, in order to represent fertility.
Taking into consideration the meat found in its stomach, as well as the hatchlings, this croc was probably a manifestation of Sobek, and may have even lived in the temple dedicated to him.
Some offerings were considered physical manifestations of Sobek. Sacred crocodiles were raised in captivity and venerated as living representations of the crocodile god.
It's likely that the crocodile mummies at Qabat el-Hawa were votive offerings. This is because there is no evidence to show that they were treated with the reverence of the crocodiles at Komombo, so they probably weren't avatars for Sobek.
Although the linen suggested these crocodiles were mummies, there's no indication on their bodies that they underwent an elaborate embalming process. So they were likely naturally mummified before being buried.
Despite their humble final resting place, the crocodiles found at Qabat el-Hawa embodied just how important these great beasts were to the citizens of ancient Egypt. It was a relationship based on equal parts fear and admiration for one of the most awe-inspiring animals on the planet. The Namib Desert spans more than 81,000 square kilometers along Africa's western coast, connecting the countries of Angola, Namibia, and South Africa.
In the local Nama language, the word Namib means an area where there is nothing.
It's one of the most remote and inhospitable places on the continent. It has a very low annual rainfall and extreme temperatures that can reach as high as 45 degrees Celsius in the day and fall well below freezing at night.
160 kilometers from the Atlantic Ocean, a sliver of hyper-arid grassland that borders the desert is mysteriously dotted with millions of unusual circles.
Best viewed from above, these strange, oddly symmetrical and evenly spaced circles are a hotly debated mystery among botanists, biologists, and ecologists alike.
The Himba people of Namibia believe them to be the footprints of Makuru, the supreme creator.
These rust-colored spots can range from 1.5 meters in diameter in the central Namib Desert, while in the northwestern region, they can grow up to an enormous 25 meters across.
Their uniformity in both shape and spacing makes them look almost man-made, like the work of a gardener gone wild. However, the area is almost completely uninhabited, except for a few small settlements and pastoral groups. So what are they?
Because they look quite similar to fairy rings, an arc of mushroom growth often found in forests and grasslands, researchers have dubbed this phenomenon fairy circles.
Fairy circles are barren spots of land surrounded by tufts of healthy grass that grow throughout a landscape, creating a periodic, evenly spaced dotted growth pattern. Fairy circles develop, grow, and die, as all plant life will do, depending on condition and environmental circumstances. Through long-term tracking of their development and using mathematical calculation, experts believe they have an estimated lifespan of 41 years.
Researchers have observed that some fairy circles could be 75 years old. It's even plausible that they've been around for centuries. So what is creating them?
One hypothesis stems from the notion that decaying plants inhibit the future growth of plant life, resulting in a particular pattern of barren land. Is it possible a plant could be so toxic that it would leave scars on the landscape long after it's gone? If so, the fairy circles, could they be those scars?
The Euphorbia damarana, also known as the Damara milkbush, is thought to be one of the most toxic plants in Namibia.
Euphorbia damarana grows up to 3 meters tall and between 3 and 5 meters wide. Gray-green in color, this succulent shrub contains a milky latex that is not only toxic, but capable of killing animals, even humans. The Namibian fairy circles have puzzled scientists for decades. Could a deadly toxic plant be the evidence they were missing?
Researchers found that the residual latex in the soil where this plant and its cousin, Euphorbia gummifera, died, resulted in faster water infiltration rates. This leaves the soil unable to hold water at the surface.
Fairy circles appear similarly hydrophobic, with the top 20 centimeters of earth unable to hold water, precisely where the grasses with shallow roots would need it.
These researchers even believe they can predict the size of future fairy circles based on the relative size of these toxic plants.
Researchers compared aerial imagery taken over a period of 50 years to prove the locations of Euphorbia plants were replaced with fairy circles when they died.
However, a new research team returned to the original area of study, and using photographs, drone imagery, and historic satellite images, they were able to prove that new growth had in fact returned to many of the locations where these plants had died. So, if not toxic plants, what else could be the cause?
Some researchers believe that these circular patterns could be the handiwork of insects. And not just any insects, the engineers of the insect world, termites.
Continent of Africa has the richest diversity of termites on the planet, with more than 1,000 species on record. These subterranean insects live in colonies ranging in size from a few hundred individuals to societies of several million, and their mounds can measure up to 9 meters high and 7 meters across.
Termites are integral to the fertility of the world's arid grasslands, and their colonies can even directly influence landscapes.
Savannas with a significant number of termite mounds are more likely to survive with much less rainfall than those without termites.
Termites are able to clear out vegetation, allowing rainfall to filter deeper into the ground to hydrate a colony year-round. As a result, these insect-rich grasslands offer much-needed lifelines to local plant and animal life by creating areas of comparative biological abundance in their immediate vicinity.
These industrious insects have been known to create patterns in a landscape. Perhaps termites are eating the roots of the grasses and systematically killing them. Could this be what's creating these circular designs?
However, termite mounds tend to result in the mirror image of fairy circles. Where fairy circles are defined by the absence of growth surrounded by vegetation, a termite mound tends to feature an island of growth surrounded by dry land.
While there are a few species of termites living in the area of the circles, there doesn't appear to be a sufficient food source for the volume of termites that would be necessary to create patterns on such a large scale.
In 2014, near-identical fairy circles were discovered over 10,000 kilometers away in the outback of Australia.
Research teams converged on the area and dug holes inside the fairy circles to assess the presence and influence of Australian termites on these patterns.
And there's no sign of termite herbivory.
Ultimately, their findings did not show a relationship between the termites and the patterns.
By comparing aerial footage of vegetation gaps created by termites, researchers found that the termite patterns were much less organized and smaller than the circles. So clearly insect activity is not producing the fairy circles. So what is causing this puzzling phenomenon?
Annual rainfall across the Namib Desert ranges from less than 2 millimeters to 200 millimeters. But within this specific strip of dotted grassland, the maximum rainfall is 120 millimeters.
With the incredible heat of the Namib Desert, water loss happens very quickly due to absorption, evaporation, and transpiration.
New research suggests that when under stress, due to drought, the grasslands have to reorganize themselves.
If this strip of the Namib received a few millimeters more of rainfall, the grasslands would show uniform growth, like the hardier grasslands to the west. So why are the grasses dying off in this pattern?
Immediately after the rains, grass will grow in all areas, filling in the circles. But researchers noticed that within the following 20 days, young grasses at the center will die.
The older, mature grasses appear to pull water away from the center toward the edges, creating a vacuum effect that can exist over great distances.
The grasses themselves are engineering the environment to their benefit. They are maximizing the rainfall through the creation of these fairy circles, and the result is this beautiful dotted landscape. If proven to be true, it's a stunning story of survival under the harshest of circumstances.
In the end, the theories behind the fairy circles are still up for debate, and greater research is required in the grasslands of the Namib Desert to determine their ultimate origin. Until then, they remain an awe-inspiring landscape to behold. "140 kilometers northeast of Cairo, in the province of Sharqiya, is an area of dry, rural land that lies along the eastern Nile River Delta and the town of Tel El Daba.
People have settled this area for millennia. Here, on the edge of the desert, is one of the cradles of human civilization.
Archaeologists interested in the mysteries of ancient Egypt have come to the Nile Delta for years. Through a combination of persistence, determination, and advanced technology, a team of researchers uncovers something lost to the world for millennia.
Buried beneath layers of earth and sand are the remnants of a large structure constructed of sturdy sandstone bricks.
It's a massive 7 to 8 meter wide by 500 meter long white stone wall buried along the town. The more they dig, the more the sands reveal. And this is no casual build.
The discoveries at Tel El Daba seem to be never-ending. What began as a massive wall has expanded into a network of foundations running beneath the city. The ancient complex covers an area of over 2 square kilometers and appears to have been built up over a long period of time.
Excavation is difficult given the number of local residents and established farming communities currently living and working on the land.
A combination of traditional archaeology and modern scientific techniques, including core sampling and geomagnetic surveying, is used to ascertain the full picture of the site.
It's a huge footprint. There are courtyards, residences, streets, temples, and so much more. It appears to be an entire settlement or ancient city.
In ancient times, the site would have been connected to the Mediterranean and the Nile Valley, offering clear strategic benefits with access to the land, river, and sea.
The Pelusiac branch of the Nile, like many of the other ancient Nile branches, disappeared a long time ago due to a variety of human and natural factors.
The Nile River was critical to the development of ancient Egypt, and most of its villages, towns, and cities were built along its banks. It was not only the main mode of transportation, but also the primary source of clean drinking water throughout the arid countryside.
One would assume that this city would be automatically attributed to the ancient Egyptians, but something here is off.
Even though the structures are made of traditional Egyptian building materials, the site has a more random, disordered plan than one would expect of Egyptian urban design. That's kind of strange. Who else could have built it?
Continued excavation and imaging of the massive site not only reveals more of the layout, but it also exposes the timeline of construction through the differing sedimentary layers. Experts believe that this site has been almost continuously occupied for thousands of years.
This site is a historical puzzle. There are foundations on top of foundations, newer, larger stone structures built directly on top of older ones. It's mind-blowing. One area of the site features a structure, likely a palace, built directly on top of a series of much older foundations.
This ancient village or settlement includes more than 342 four-roomed mud brick residences. They were very small even for that time.
Archaeologists believe that this is the first and oldest mud brick settlement in the region and date this structure to sometime between 1963 to 1934 BCE.
The ceramic fragments discovered in this layer of earth include red polished pottery in simple clay vessels, likely from Upper Egypt. These findings indicate that this early structure was from a purely Egyptian settlement.
Eventually, these homes were abandoned and newer structures were built on top. And that's where things begin to get weird. They include a foundation of a surprising, clearly foreign building.
The plan of the structure is reminiscent of a type of home that would be found in northern Syria, not here in Egypt. The existence of this home signals the presence of foreigners, non-Egyptians, who settled in the area.
Given the authentic style of the home, the people who built it and lived here likely came from an area known as the Levant, that's centered around what is modern-day Palestine, Syria, and Jordan.
The Levant was a region encompassing the countries surrounding the eastern Mediterranean. It extended from modern-day Turkey to the north, including the coastlines of Greece, down to Egypt in the south. The region was highly populated and well-traveled for the time, home to ancient trade centers and routes. So perhaps this was a Levantine outpost.
At another site within the compound, archaeological teams uncover a much larger, more palatial residence in keeping with Egyptian designs. It is named Palace Necropolis for the cemetery within its walled enclosure. Researchers examining the cemetery realized that the site appears to span two entirely different periods of time.
The new tombs have been built next to older tombs.
The later tombs have been built in a manner that preserves the integrity of the old tombs.
The earlier graves are likely from the 1900s BCE, and they are simple and shallow, containing few offerings for the afterlife. Some also contain multiple people as well as animals.
Dated approximately 350 years after the first purely Egyptian settlement, these newer tomb designs and goods indicate both the economic growth of the community as well as increased contact with foreigners.
Researchers performed strontium analysis on the teeth of 75 of the remains taken from the various cemetery layers. 24 people were found to be foreign-born residents of the community, indicating a distinct presence of both local and foreign peoples living in direct proximity.
The remains tell the story of an increasingly diverse population, seemingly living and dying in harmony. So what was happening here?
Though most of Egypt's history is well documented, there is a period of about 100 years that we know little about, except for stories written 1,500 years later by an Egyptian priest named Manetho in his book Egyptiaca.
This one book told stories of foreign invaders taking over Egyptian cities to rule the land. These evocative accounts took hold in the minds of Egyptians and Egyptologists alike.
This history refers to a capital city called Avaris, and generations of Egyptologists began looking for it as far back as 1880. So could the modern site of Tel Adaba actually be the lost city of Avaris?
Exploring further, archaeologists uncover what appears to be a different large palace complex. Along the grounds, they find the remains of a broken limestone door jamb with carved impressions.
The hieroglyphic impressions on the door jamb connects to the Hyksos of the 15th dynasty of Egypt. The word Hyksos is Greek, meaning rulers of foreign lands.
This palace is clearly not Egyptian in style. It appears to feature courtyards, temples, and multiple residences, but it lacks that classic Egyptian design balance.
Ancient Egyptian architecture often featured ordered, structural symmetry, reflecting the concept of balance and harmony that they also sought in life. The Luxor Temple, the Temple of Ramesses III, and the Temple of Isis are all beautiful examples of such symmetrical design.
This site shows more similarities to palaces built in Syria than it does to local designs.
Within this courtyard, there are offering pits with thousands of pieces of broken pottery, many from the Levant and other foreign regions, as well as animal bones. This assemblage of objects implies that it was the site of great feasts and celebrations.
Not only are there pits with what appear to be offerings from a ritual feast, but other nearby pits contain something that is entirely bizarre: severed human hands.
Near the modern city of Tel Adaba, along the ancient Nile River, experts may have finally identified the lost city of Avaris and the mysteries of its inner workings. The discovery of severed human hands could be evidence of an ancient Egyptian practice known as gold of valor. This was a practice where soldiers would exchange the severed right hand of their enemy, proof of their victory in battle, for gold from their leader.
Discovered near the palace throne room, likely used by King Khayan, there are a total of 16 right hands.
It's a truly gruesome find. The hands have been dated to around 3,500 years ago, towards the end of the Hyksos reign.
To cut off a dead enemy's hand was an efficient way of counting casualties, and the hands were piled up and counted by scribes as the basis for awarding the Gold of Valor. These 16 hands are the first pieces of physical evidence for a practice that until now has only been documented in Egyptian art and writing.
Tel Adaba is now believed to have once been the city of Avaris, the Hyksos capital that flourished between 1650 and 1550 BCE. It was eventually reclaimed by the Egyptians when the pharaohs of the 18th dynasty laid siege and took the city back.
The most interesting part of this discovery is not that the city was foreign ruled, but that there are no signs of forced invasion or violent takeover by the Hyksos, as told in the stories of Manetho. Instead, there are hundreds of years of evidence of cohabitation and collaboration between immigrants and locals.
This site may never be entirely excavated, nor will its finds ever be complete due to looting and continued modern development in the area. But the location is proof that the Nile River Delta has always been a draw for many peoples of the world. The Pisco Valley on the Nazca Plateau lies near the southern coast of Peru, around 250 kilometers south of Lima, the country's capital city.
There are three basic geographic regions in Peru: the Selva, which is the Amazon rainforest, the Sierra, which is the highlands of the Andes Mountains, and the Costa, which is the coastal region.
The Nazca Plateau is in the Costa, nestled between the Pacific Ocean and the Andes. It's mostly arid, rocky hills.
While flying over the area, a pilot conducting an aerial survey spots something strange on the ground below. A long strip of what appears to be evenly spaced depressions weaving its way through the jagged landscape.
He can't figure out what it is. It looks like a tire track from a huge bicycle that somebody rode through the hills. It's enormous, really a sight to behold.
The band begins at the mouth of the Pisco Valley. It ranges in width from about 14 to 21 meters and snakes its way uphill for nearly 1.5 kilometers.
It sticks out like a sore thumb. Clearly, this has to be man-made. Formations like this simply don't occur naturally. But what is it?
Ground-level investigation at the site reveals that the band is made up of circular holes, thousands of them.
It's estimated that there are between 5,000 to 6,000 holes, measuring around 1 meter in diameter, and varying in depth between 50 to 100 centimeters.
There are 3 different types of holes. Some are raised off the ground with rocks, others appear to be dug into the side of the hills, and some are standard holes with soil lining the edges.
Locals call it Monte Sierpe, which translates to Serpent Mountain, likely due to its snakeskin-like appearance, but also it's known simply as the Band of Holes.
Since its discovery, this strange formation has been the subject of much debate. First of all, who built it?
A mysterious pattern leading away from the Peruvian coast, known as the Band of Holes, has experts stumped. Searching for answers, researchers turn their attention a couple of 100 kilometers south to Peru's famous Nazca Lines.
The Nazca Lines are one of the world's largest geoglyphs, spanning some 500 square kilometers. There are more than 800 straight lines, 300 geometric shapes, and 70 plant and animal designs called biomorphs.
Given their relative proximity to each other, and because they're both large-scale manipulations of the Earth, some observers propose that maybe the Band of Holes is a form of ancient geoglyphic art.
I suppose it's possible, but the Nazca Lines clearly form images, while the Band of Holes doesn't appear to have any real order to it.
Around 5 kilometers from the site, a huge 15th century Inca complex called Tambo, Colorado, can be found.
Tambo, Colorado was very important to the Inca Empire. It was a regional center of economic, cultural, and administrative activity.
It's a pretty impressive place with several large structures surrounding a central plaza, and because of the hot, dry environment, it's remarkably well preserved.
The complex is strategically located on what was a main road that connected the coast to the inland region. Here, the Inca could control the flow of goods and monitor access to water sources. So it makes sense that they may have wanted to safeguard it against attack.
Some experts have proposed that the Band of Holes was built by the Incas as a defensive structure to protect this vital hub.
They could have been foxholes, pits dug in the ground for cover against attacks, or used as firing positions. Or maybe they were obstacles designed to slow down the enemy.
Doubters are quick to point out that if the Band of Holes was a defensive structure, there would probably be military artifacts discovered there. Yet, none have been found.
Strangely, no artifacts whatsoever have been discovered in or around the holes. But researchers working nearby recently found small amounts of pottery dating to the Late Horizon period, which was between 1450 and 1533 CE, a time when the Inca Empire grew to dominate most of the Andean region.
Given the dating of the pottery and the proximity to Tambo, Colorado, it's safe to assume that the Band of Holes was built by the Inca.
The Inca were known to use foot plows and stone picks, and it's been estimated that a healthy young man could probably construct one of these holes fairly easily in a few hours.
For projects like this, they worked in teams of 10, 50, 100, or even 500 men. And if you do the math, a group of 100 men could have completed the Band of Holes in around a month.
The Inca were famous, very skilled engineers who constructed majestic sites like Machu Picchu. They also built and sustained the longest road system in pre-Columbian South America through one of the most challenging terrains on the planet. So it's entirely reasonable that they could have constructed the Band of Holes with relative ease.
They had the skills, they had the resources, they had the manpower to build it. But that still doesn't answer the question of what exactly it is.
Recent discoveries made at Incahuasi, an Inca center similar to Tambo, Colorado, just 120 kilometers to the north, may just solve the riddle of the Band of Holes once and for all.
Archaeologists unearthed a checkerboard pattern built into the floor of a huge open room. There are 3,510 squares, all measuring 23 centimeters by 23 centimeters, and they were found to contain traces of food.
They also discovered quipus, which are knotted string counting devices used by Inca state accountants.
It's believed that the squares on the floor were used by citizens to measure out tributes to the Inca state, a form of taxation.
People would fill up their sections with produce, beans, grains, peppers, squash, whatever they had to offer, and the accountants would record whatever they had given.
Researchers can't help but notice that despite the difference in scale, what was found at Incahuasi does bear some resemblance to the layout of the Band of Holes.
It could be an improvised regional adaptation of the checkerboard system born out of necessity.
Tax tributes were likely taken to Tambo, Colorado, so the Band of Holes would have been an ideal place for people to stop and measure their produce.
There were no artifacts in the holes, meaning that they could have been used to store perishable goods or items that were put there temporarily, leaving no trace behind.
Drone images of the site also reveal something that had gone previously undetected: distinct patterns in the layout of the holes.
When analyzing the pictures, they noticed that the holes seem to be divided into segments, each one with a recognizable pattern in terms of both orientation and the number of holes in each row.
Some segments have a diagonal arrangement with a 1, 3, 5, 7, 9, 11, 11 pattern in the number of holes per row. Other segments contain perpendicular east-west rows in a 6, 6, 7, 7, 8, 8 pattern.
Each segment was probably devoted to a tax-paying group, maybe an extended family or a regional association of individuals.
In the future, the team hopes to conduct a thorough soil analysis in order to confirm their hypothesis.
If the holes were used to measure produce, there will likely be remnants of plant tissue or pollen left behind, which could be tested to determine the dates when food was present.
It could be a major step towards broadening our knowledge of the Inca taxation system as well as Inca civilization as a whole.
Should the Band of Holes be proven a taxation site, it will further illustrate that even in the ancient world, the only certain things in life were death and taxes.